Good morning, everybody, my lovely friends and Floofles. It is a wonderful Tuesday morning. Though it's a bit rainy and a bit gloomy, it's like the perfect weather for a nice, relaxing stream. Today we're going to be finishing up Howl's Moving Castle. I'm so excited to be able to share this story with you. It has been my favorite to read, and I can't wait to continue on with the other stories in the series as well. Apparently it's a trilogy, and I hadn't known it until fairly recently. So we're gonna finish up Howl's Moving Castle today, and then next week we'll start a new story, and then we'll revisit the Howl's Moving Castle series again in the future. But until then, let's continue on with Howl's Moving Castle today. I genuinely hope everyone's having a good morning. I am actually very, very tired. I'm very, very tired. It's been a very rough night leading into a very rough morning. So I'm just a little bit tired. So I'll probably be a little on the softer side today. Let's see. Last time we left off, they moved the castle. Sophie tried to blacken Howl's name, and Howl had a fight with the Witch of the Waste, which prompted the move of the castle. So let's get back into it with Howl's Moving Castle. I hope all of you can enjoy. Let's see. Chapter 18, in which the Scarecrow and Miss Angorian reappear. They opened the flower shop the next day. As Howl had pointed out, it could not have been any simpler. Every early morning, all they had to do was open the door with the knob purple down, and go out into the swimming green haze to gather flowers. It soon became a routine. Sophie took her stick and her scissors and stumped about, chatting to her stick, using it to test the squashy ground or hook down sprays of high up choice roses. Michael took an invention of his own, which he was very proud of. It was a large tin tub with water in it, which floated in the air and followed Michael wherever he went among the bushes. The dog man went too. He had a wonderful time rushing about the wet green lanes, chasing butterflies or trying to catch the tiny bright birds that fed on the flowers. While he dashed about, Sophie cut armloads of long irises, or lilies, or frondy orange flowers, or branches of blue hibiscus, and Michael loaded the bath with orchids, roses, starry white flowers, shiny vermilion ones, or anything that caught his fancy. They all enjoyed it this time. Then, before the heat in the bushes grew too intense, they took the day's flowers back to the shop and arranged them in a motley collection of jugs and buckets which Howl had dug out of the yard. 2 of the buckets were actually 7-league boots. Nothing, Sophie thought as she arranged the shocks of gladiolus in them, could show how completely Howl had lost interest in Nettie. He did not care now if Sophie used them or not. Howl was nearly missing while they gathered flowers. And the doorknob was always turned black down. He was usually back for a late breakfast, looking dreamy, still in his black clothes. He would never tell Sophie which suit the black one really was. "I'm in mourning for Mrs. Penstemon," was all he would say. And if Sophie or Michael asked why Howl was away at the time, Howl would look injured and say, "If you want to talk to a school teacher, you have to catch up before school starts." Then he would disappear into the bathroom for the next 2 hours. Meanwhile, Sophie and Michael put on their fine clothes and opened the shop. Howl insisted on the fine clothes. He said it would attract custom. Sophie insisted they all wore aprons, and after the first few days, when the people of Market Chipping simply stared through the window and did not come into the shop became very popular. Word had gone around that Jenkins had flowers like no other flowers ever seen before. People Sophie had known all her life came and bought flowers by the bundle. None of them recognized her, and that made her feel very odd. They all thought she was Howl's old mother, but Sophie had enough of being Howl's old mother. "I'm his aunt," she told Mrs. Cesari. She became known as Aunt Jenkins. By the time Howl arrived in the shop, in a black apron to match his suit, he usually found it quite busy. He made it busier still. This is when Sophie began to be sure that the black suit was really the charmed gray and scarlet one. Any lady Howl served was sure to go away with at least twice the number of flowers she asked for. Most of the time, Howl charmed them into buying 10 times as much. Before long, Sophie noticed the ladies peering in and deciding not to come into the shop when they saw Howl there. She did not blame them. If you just want a rose for a buttonhole, you did not want to be forced to buy 3 dozen orchids. She did not discourage Howl when Howl took to spending long hours in the work shed across the yard. "I'm setting up defenses against the witch before you ask," he said. "By the time I finish, there will be no way she can get into any part of this place." There is sometimes a problem with leftover flowers. Sophie could not bear to see them wilting overnight. She found that she could keep them fairly fresh if she talked to them. After that, she talked to flowers a lot. She got Michael to make her a plant nutrition spell. She experimented in buckets in the sink and in tubs in the alcove where she used to trim hats. "Hello, Booby. Do you want to read a story too? You want to say hi to everybody?" He was rubbing up against my microphone. I don't know if you heard that. Such a good boy. So she got Michael to make her a plant nutrition spell, and she experimented in buckets in the sink and in tubs in the alcove where she used to trim hats. She found she could keep some plants fresh for days, so of course she experimented some more. She got the soot out of the yard and planted things in it, muttering busily. She grew a navy blue rose that, like that, which pleased her greatly. Its buds were coal black, and its flowers opened bluer and bluer until they became almost the same blue as calcifer. Sophie was so delighted with it, she took roots from all of the bags hanging on the beams and experimented with those. She told herself she had never been happier in her life. This is not true. Something was wrong, and Sophie could not understand what. Sometimes she thought it was the way no one in market shipping recognized her. She did not dare go and see Martha, for fear Martha would not know her either. She did not dare tip the flowers out of the 7-league boots and go see Letty for the same reason. She just could not bear either of her sisters to see her as an old woman. Michael went off with bunches of spare flowers to see Martha all the time. Sometimes Sophie thought that was what the matter was with her. Michael was so cheerful, and she was left on her own in the shop more and more often. But that did not seem to be quite it. Sophie enjoyed selling flowers on her own. Sometimes the trouble seemed to be Calcifer. Calcifer was bored. He had nothing to do except keep the castle gently drifting along the lanes of the grass and around the various pools and lakes, and to make sure that they arrived at a new spot with new flowers every morning. His blue face was always leaning eagerly out of the grate when Sophie and Michael came in with their flowers. "I want to see what it's like out there," he said. Sophie brought him tasty-smelling leaves to burn, which made the castle room smell as strongly as the bathroom. But Calcifer said what he really wanted was company. They went into the shop all day and left him alone. So Sophie made Michael serve the shop for at least an hour every morning while she went and talked to Calcifer. She invented guessing games to keep Calcifer occupied while she was busy, but Calcifer was still discontented. "When are you going to break my contract with Howl?" he asked more and more often. And Sophie put Calcifer off. "I'm working on it," she said. "It won't be long now." This was not quite true. Sophie had stopped thinking of it unless she had to. When she put together what Mrs. Penstemon had said with all the things Howl and Calcifer had said, she found she had some strong and rather terrible ideas about that contract. She was sure that breaking it would be the end of both Howl and Calcifer. Howl might deserve it, but Calcifer did not. And since Howl seemed to be working quite hard in order to slither out of the rest of the witch's curse, Sophie wanted to do nothing unless she could help him. Sometimes Sophie thought it was simply the dog man was getting her down. He was such a doleful creature. The only time he seemed to enjoy himself was when he was chasing down the green lanes between the bushes every morning. For the rest of the day he trudged gloomily around after Sophie, sighing deeply. As Sophie could do nothing about him either, she was rather glad when the weather grew hotter and hotter towards midsummer day, and the dog man took to lying in patches of shade out in the yard, panting. While the roots Sophie had planted had become quite interesting, the onion had become a small palm tree with sprouting little onion-scented nuts. Another root grew into a sort of pink sunflower. Only one was so low to grow. When at last it put out 2 round green leaves, Sophie could hardly wait to see what it would grow into. The next day it looked as if it might be an orchid. It had pointed leaves spotted with mauve and long stalks growing out of the middle with large fresh buds on it. The day after that, Sophie left the fresh flowers in the tin bath and hurried eagerly to see how it was getting on. The bud had opened into a pink flower like an orchid that had been through a mangle. It was flat and joined to the stalk just below the round tip. There were 4 petals sprouting from a plump pink middle, 2 pointing downward and 2 more halfway up that stuck out sideways. While Sophie stared at it, a strong scent of spring flowers warned her that Howl had just come in and was standing behind her. "What is that thing?" he said. If you were expecting an ultraviolet violet or an infrared geranium, you got it wrong, Mrs. Mad Scientist. "It looks to me like a squashed baby flower," Michael said, coming to look. It did too. Hal shot Michael an alarmed look and picked up the flower in its pot. He slid it out of the pot and into his hand, where he carefully separated the white, thready roots and the soot and the remains of the manure spell, until he uncovered the brown, forked root Sophie had grown from it. "I might have guessed," said Hal. "It's mandrake root." Sophie strikes again. "You do have a touch, don't you, Sophie?" He put the plant carefully back, passed it to Sophie, and went away, looking rather pale. So that was almost all the curse come true, Sophie thought as she went to arrange the fresh flowers in the shop window. The mandrake root had had a baby. That only left one more thing. The wind to advance an honest mind. If that meant Hal's mind had to be honest, Sophie thought, there was a chance that the curse might never come true. She told herself it served Hal right anyway, for courting Miss Angorian every morning in a charmed suit. But she still felt alarmed and guilty. She arranged a sheaf of white lilies in the 7-league boots. She crawled into the window to get them just so, and she heard a regular clump, clump, clump from outside in the street. It was not the sound of a horse. It was the sound of a stick hitting the stones. Sophie's heart was behaving oddly even before she dared to look out the window. There, sure enough, came the scarecrow, hopping slowly and purposely down the center of the street. The rags trailing from its outstretched arms were fewer and grayer, and the turn-up of its face was withered into a look of determination, as if it had hopped ever since Howl hurled it away, until at last it had hopped its way back. Sophie was not the only one to be scared. The few people about that day early was running away from the scarecrow as hard as they could run, but the scarecrow took no notice and hopped on. Sophie hid her face from it. "We're not here," she told it in a fierce whisper. "You don't know we're here. You can't find us. Hop away fast." The clump, clump of the hopping sticks slowed as the scarecrow neared the shop. Sophie wanted to scream for Howl, but all she was able to do was go on repeating, "We're not here. Go away quickly." And the hopping speeded up, just as she told it to, and the scarecrow hopped its way past the shop and on through market shipping. Sophie thought she was going to come over queer, but she seemed to have been holding her breath. She took a deep breath and felt shaky with relief. If the scarecrow came back, she could just send it away again. Hal had gone out when Sophie went into the castle room. "He seemed awfully upset," Michael said. Sophie looked at the door. The knob was blacked down. Not that upset, she thought. Michael went out too to Cesari's that morning, and Sophie was alone with the shop. It was very hot. The flowers wilted in spite of the spells, and very few people seemed to want to buy any. What with this and the mandrake root and the scarecrow, all Sophie's feelings seemed to be coming to a head. She was downright miserable. "It may be the curse hovering to catch up with Hal," she said to the flowers. "But I think it's being the eldest, really. Look at me. I set out to seek my fortune and end up exactly where I started, as old as the hills still." Here the dog-man put his glossy red snout around the door to the yard and whined. Sophie sighed. Never an hour passed without the creature checking up on her. Yes, I'm still here, she said. Where did you expect me to be? The dog came inside the shop. He sat up and stretched his paws out stiffly in front of him. Sophie realized he was trying to turn into a man. Poor creature. She tried to be nice to him because he was, after all, worse off than she was. Try harder, she said. Put your back into it. You can be a man if you want. The dog stretched and straightened his back, and strained and strained. And just as Sophie was sure he was going to have to give up or topple over backward, he managed to rise to his hind legs and heave himself up into a distraught ginger-haired man. I envy Howl, he panted. Does that so easily. I was dogging the hedge. You helped. Told Letty I knew you. I'd keep watch. I was here before, and he began to double up again into a dog and howl with annoyance. With which and shot, he wailed, and fell forward on his hands, growling a great deal of gray and white hair as he did so. Sophie stared at the large shaggy dog that now stood there. You were with the witch, she said. She remembered now, the anxious ginger-haired man who was staring at her in horror. Then you know who I am, and you know I'm under a spell. Does Letty know too? The huge shaggy head nodded. As she called you Gaston, Sophie remembered. Oh, my friend, she has made it hard for you. Fancy having all that hair in this heat. You better go somewhere cool. The dog nodded again and shambled miserably into the yard. But why did Letty send you? Sophie wondered. She felt thoroughly put out and disturbed by this discovery. She went upstairs and threw the broom cupboard to talk to Calcifer. Calcifer was not much help. It doesn't make a difference how many people know you're under a spell, he said. It hasn't helped the dog much, has it? No, but... Sophie began, but just then, the castle door clicked and opened. Sophie and Calcifer looked. They saw the doorknob was still set to black down, and they expected Howl to come through. It was hard to say which of them was more astonished when the person who slid rather cautiously around the door turned out to be Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian was equally astonished. Oh, I beg your pardon, she said. I thought Master Jenkins might be here. He's out, Sophie said stiffly, as she wondered where Hal had gone, if not to see Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian let go of the door, which she had been clutching in her surprise. She left it swinging open on nothing and came pleadingly towards Sophie. Wasabi Man! Good morning! Thank you for being here! I'm having a bit of a soft and quiet morning, but thank you for being here. I'm happy you could make it. She left it swinging open on nothing and came pleadingly towards Sophie. Sophie found she had got up herself and came across the room. It seemed as if she was trying to block Miss Angorian off. Please, said Miss Angorian, don't tell Mr. Jenkins I was here. To tell you the truth, I only encouraged him in hopes of getting news of my fiancé, Ben Sullivan, you know. I'm positive Ben disappeared to the same place Mr. Jenkins keeps disappearing to. Only Ben didn't come back. There's no Mr. Sullivan here, Sophie said, and as she thought, that's Wizard Suliman's name. I don't believe a word of it. Oh, I know that, Miss Angorian said, but this feels like the right place. Do you mind if I just look around a little to give myself some idea of the sort of life Ben's leading now? She hooked her sheet of black hair behind one ear and tried to walk further into the room. Sophie stood in the way. This forced Miss Angorian to tiptoe pleadingly sideways towards the workbench. How very quaint, she said, looking at the bottles and jars. What a quaint little town, she said, looking out of the window. It's called Market Chipping, Sophie said, and she moved around and herded Mrs. Angorian back towards the door. And what's up those stairs? Miss Angorian asked, pointing to the open door to the stairs. Hal's private room, Sophie said firmly, walking Miss Angorian away backwards. And what's through the other open doors? Miss Angorian asked. A flower shop, said Sophie. Nosy Parker, she thought. But this time Miss Angorian either had to back into the chair or out the door again. She stared at Castlefor in a vague, frowning way, as if she was not sure what she was seeing, and Castlefor simply stared back without saying a word. This made Sophie feel better about being so very unfriendly. Only people who understood Castlefor were really welcome into Howl's house. But now Miss Angorian made a dive around the chair and noticed Howl's guitar leaning in its corner. She snatched it up with a gasp and turned around, holding it to her chest possessively. "Where did you get this?" she demanded in a low, emotional voice. "Ben had a guitar like this. It could be Ben's." "I heard Howl bought it last winter," Sophie said. She walked forward again, trying to scoop Miss Angorian out of her corner and through the door. "Something's happened to Ben," Miss Angorian said throbbingly. "He would never have parted from his guitar. Where is he? I know he can't be dead. I'd know in my heart if he were." Sophie wondered whether to tell Miss Angorian that the witch had caught the wizard Solomon. She looked across to see what the human skull was. She had half a mind to wave it in Miss Angorian's face and say it was Wizard Solomon's. But the skull was in the sink, hidden behind a bucket of spare ferns and lilies, and she knew that if she went over there, Miss Angorian would ooze out into the room again. Besides, it would be unkind. "May I take this guitar?" Miss Angorian said, huskily, clutching into her. "To remind me of Ben?" The throb in Miss Angorian's voice annoyed Sophie. "No," she said. "There's no need to be so intense about it. You've no proof it was his." She hobbled close to Miss Angorian and seized the guitar by its neck. Miss Angorian stared at her over with wide, anguished eyes. Sophie dragged. Miss Angorian hung on. The guitar gave out a horrible, out-of-tune jingles. Sophie jerked it out of Miss Angorian's arms. "Don't be silly," she said. "You have no right to walk into other people's castles and take their guitars. I told you Mr. Sullivan is not here. Now go back to Wales. Go on." And she used the guitar to push Miss Angorian backwards through the open door. Miss Angorian backed into the nothingness until half of her vanished. "You're hard," she said reproachfully. "Yes, I am," said Sophie, and slammed the door on her. She turned the knob to orange down to prevent Miss Angorian from coming back, and dumped the guitar back into its corner with a firm twang. "And don't you dare tell Howl that she was here," she said unreasonably to Castlefor. "I bet she came to see Howl. The rest was just a pack of lies. Wizard Solomon was settled here years ago. He probably came to get away from her beastly throbbing voice." Castlefor chuckled. "I've never seen anyone got rid of so fast," he said. This made Sophie feel both unkind and guilty. After all, she herself had walked into the castle in much the same way, and she had been twice as nosy as Miss Angorian. "Gah!" she said. She stumped into the bathroom and stared at her withered old face in the mirror. She picked out one of the packets labeled Skin, then tossed it down again. Even young and fresh, she did not think her face compared particularly well with Miss Angorian's. "Gah!" she said again. "Duh!" She hobbled rapidly back and seized the ferns and lilies from the sink. She hobbled them, dripping, into the shop where she ran them into a bucket of nutrition spells. "Be daffodils," she told them in a mad, angry, croaking voice. "Be daffodils and Junes, you beastly things." The dog-man put his shaggy face around the yard door. When she saw the mood Sophie was in, he backed out again hurriedly. When Michael came merrily in with a large pie, and a minute later, Sophie gave him such a glare that Michael instantly remembered a spell Hal had asked him to make up, and fled away through the broom cupboard. "Ha!" Sophie snarled after him. She bent over her bucket again. Be daffodils," she croaked. It did not make her feel any better that she knew it was a silly way to behave. Chapter 19. Having a little tea this morning instead of my usual coffee. Something to soothe my throat so I don't strain it again like I did last week. In which Sophie expresses her feelings with Weed Killer. Howl opened the shop door towards the end of the afternoon and sauntered in, whistling. He seemed to have gotten over the Mandrake route. It did not make Sophie feel any better to find he had not gone to Wales after all. She gave him her very fiercest glare. "Merciful heavens," Howl said. "I think that turned me into stone." "What's the matter?" Sophie only snarled. What suit are you wearing? Hal looked down on his black garments. Does it matter? Yes, growled Sophie. And don't give me that it's about being in mourning. Which one is it really? Oh! Excuse me, I gotta go get that real quick. Excuse me. I gotta go upstairs and get that. Ah! Sorry about that. That was a package for the creator. I don't know if there's gonna be any more. I know the creator was waiting for a package, so I had to go get that. Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. Alright, let's see. Where were we? Let's see. I remember this happening in anime. Yeah! The anime took a bit more creative liberty, from the story. I like both, but they're both vastly different stories. I like to think of the anime as an alternate universe to the book. I like both of them quite a lot. They're both very lovely. Alright, let's continue. Hal shrugged and held up one trailing sleeve as if he was not sure which it was. He stared at it, looking puzzled. The black color of it ran downward from his shoulder and into the pointed hanging tip. His shoulder and the top of his sleeve grew brown, then gray, while the pointed tip turned inkier and inkier until Howl was wearing a black suit with one blue and silver sleeve whose end seemed to have been dipped in tar. That one, he said, and let the black spread back up to his shoulder again. Sophie was somehow more annoyed than ever. She gave a wordless grump of rage. Sophie! Hal said in his most laughing, pleading way. The dogman pushed open the yard door and shambled in. He never would let Hal talk for Sophie for long. Hal stared at it. We've got an old English sheepdog now, he said, as if he was glad of the distraction. 2 dogs are going to take a lot of feeding. There's only 1 dog, Sophie said crossly. He's under a spell. Yes, he is, said Howl, and he set off towards the dog with a speed that showed he was quite glad to get away from Sophie. This, of course, was the last thing the dogman had wanted. He backed away. Hal pounced and caught him by 2 handfuls of shaggy hair before he could reach the door. So he is, he said, and knelt down to look into what could be seen of the sheepdog's eyes. Sophie, he said, what do you mean by not telling me about this? This dog is a man, and he's in a terrible state. Hal whirled around on one knee, holding the dog. Sophie looked into Hal's glass marble glare and realized that Hal was angry now. Really angry. Good. Sophie felt like a fight. You could have noticed for yourself, she said, glaring back, daring Hal to do his worst with green slime. Anyway, that dog didn't want. Hal was too angry to listen. He jumped up and hauled the dog across the tiles. And so I would have done, if I hadn't had things on my mind, he said. Come on, I want you on your feet. I want you in front of Calcifer. The dog braced all 4 shaggy feet. Hal lunged at it, braced and sliding. Michael! He yelled. There was a particular sound to that yell which brought Michael running. And did you know this dog was really a man? Hal asked as he and Michael dragged the reluctant mountain of dog up the stairs. He's not, is he? Michael asked, shocked and surprised. Then I'll let you off and just blame Sophie, Hal said, hauling the dog through the broom cupboard. Anything like this is always Sophie. But you knew, didn't you, Calcifer? He said as the two of them dragged the dog in front of the hearth. Calcifer retreated until he was bent backwards against the chimney. You never asked, he said. Do I have to ask you? Howl said. All right, I should have noticed myself, but you disgust me, Calcifer. Compared with the way the witch treats her demon, you live a revoltingly easy life, and all I ask in return is you tell me things I need to know. This is twice you've let me down. Now help me get this creature into its own shape this minute. Calcifer was an unusually sickly shade of blue. All right, he said sulkily. The dogman tried to get away, but Howl got his shoulder under its chest and shoved, so that it went up on its hind legs willy-nilly. Then he and Michael held it there. What's the silly creature holding out for? Howl panted. This feels like one of the Witch of the Wastes again, doesn't it? Yes, there's several layers of it, said Calcifer. Let's get the dog part off anyway, said Howl. Calcifer surged into a deep roaring blue. Sophie, watching prudently from the door of the broom cupboard, saw the shaggy dog shape fade away inside the man's shape. It faded to dog again, and then back to man, blurred then hardened. Finally, Howl and Michael were each holding the arm of a ginger-haired man in a crumpled brown suit. Sophie was not surprised she had not recognized him. Apart from his anxious look, his face was almost totally lacking in personality. Now, who are you, my friend? Howl asked. The man put his hands up and shakily felt his face. I'm not sure. Calcifer said, the most recent name he's answered to was Percival. The man looked at Calcifer as if he wished Calcifer did not know this. Did I? He said. Then we'll call you Percival from now, Howl said. He turned the ex-dog around and sat him in a chair. Sit there and take it easy, and tell us what do you remember. By the feel of you, the witch had rubbing his face again. She took my head off. I remember being on a shelf, looking at the rest of me. Michael was astonished. But you're dead, he protested. Not necessarily, said Howl. You haven't gotten to that sort of witchcraft yet, but I could take any piece of you I wanted and leave the rest of you alive, if I went about it the right way. He frowned at the ex-dog. But I'm not sure the witch put this one back together properly. Calcifer, who was obviously trying to prove that he was working hard for Howl, said, This man's incomplete. He has parts from some other man, too. Percival looked more distraught than ever. Now don't alarm him, Calcifer, said Howl. He must feel bad enough anyway. Do you know why the witch took your head off, my friend? He asked Percival. No, said Percival. I don't remember anything. Sophie knew that could not be true. She rather snorted. Michael was suddenly seized with the most exciting idea. He leaned over to Percival and asked, Did you ever answer to the name of Justin, or your Royal Highness? Sophie snorted again. She knew this was ridiculous even before Percival said, No. The witch called me Gaston, but that's not my name. Don't crowd him, Michael, said Howl. And don't make Sophie snort again. Don't make Sophie snort again. In the mood she's in, she'll bring down the castle next time. Though that seemed to mean Howl was no longer angry. Sophie found she was angrier than ever. She stumped off to the shop where she banged about, shutting the shop and putting her things away for the night. She went to look at her daffodils. Something had gone horribly wrong with them. They were wet brown things trailing out of a bucket full of the most poisonous-smelling liquid she had ever come across. Oh, confound it all, she yelled. What's all this now? Said Howl, arriving in the shop. He bent over the bucket and sniffed. You seem to have a rather efficient weed killer in here. How about trying it on those weeds in the drive in the mansion? I will, said Sophie. I feel like killing something. She slammed around until she had found the watering can, and stumped through the castle with the can on the bucket, where she hurled open the door, orange down, on the mansion drive. Percival looked up anxiously. They had given him the guitar, rather as he gave a baby a rattle, and he was sitting making horrible twangings. You go with her, Percival, Howl said. The mood she's in, she'll be killing all the trees, too. So Percival laid down the guitar and took the bucket carefully out of Sophie's hand. Sophie stumped out into the golden summer evening at the end of the valley. Everyone had been too busy up till now to pay much attention to the mansion. It was much grander than Sophie had realized. It had a weedy terrace with statues along the edge and steps down to the drive. When Sophie looked back, on the pretext of telling Percival to hurry up, she saw the house was very big, with more statues along the roof and rows of windows. But it was derelict. Green mildew ran down the peeling walls from every window. Many of the windows were broken, and the shutters that should have folded against the wall beside them were gray and blistered and hanging sideways. Huh, said Sophie. I think at least Howl could have do is make the place look a little bit more lived in. But no, he's far too busy gadding off to Wales. Don't just stand there, Percival. Pour some of that stuff into the can and then come along beside me. Percival meekly did as she said. He was no fun at all to bully. Sophie suspected that's why Hal had sent him with her. She snorted and took her anger out on the weeds. Whatever the stuff was that had killed the daffodils, it was strong. The weeds in the drive died as soon as it touched them. So did the grass and the sides of the drive until Sophie calmed down a little. The evening calmed her. The fresh air was blowing off the distant hills, and clumps of trees planted at the side of the drive rustled majestically in it. Sophie weed-killed her way down a quarter of the drive. You remember a great deal more than you let on, she accused Percival while he refilled her can. What do the rich really want with you? Why did she bring you into her shop with her that time? She wanted to find out about Howl, Percival said. Howl, said Sophie. But you didn't know him, did you? No, but I must have known something. It had to do with the curse she put on him, Percival explained. But I've no idea what it was. She took it, you see, after we came to the shop. I feel bad about that. I was trying to stop her knowing, because a curse is an evil thing, and I did it by thinking about Letty. Letty was just in my head. I don't know how I know her, because Letty said she had never seen me when I went to Upper Folding. But I know all about her. Enough so that when the witch made me tell her about Letty, I said she kept a hat shop in Market Chipping. So the witch went there to teach us both a lesson. And you were there. She thought you were Letty. I was horrified because I didn't know Letty had a sister. Sophie picked up the can and weed-killed generously, wishing the weeds were the witch. And she turned you into a dog straight after that? Just outside of town, said Percival. As soon as I let her know what she wanted, she opened the carriage door and said, Off you run. I'll call you when I need you. And I ran, because I could feel some sort of spell following me. It caught up just as I got into a farm, and the people there saw me change into a dog and thought I was a werewolf, and tried to kill me. I had to bite one to get away, but I couldn't get rid of the stick, and it stuck in the hedge when I tried to get through. Sophie weed-killed her way down another curve of the drive as she listened. Then you went to Mrs. Fairfax. Yes, I was looking for Letty. They were both very kind to me, Percival said, even though they'd never seen me before. And Wizard Howl kept visiting to court Letty. Letty didn't want him, and she asked me to bite him to get rid of him, until Howl suddenly began to ask her about you, and Sophie narrowly missed the weed killing her shoes. Since the gravel was smoking where the stuff met it, it was probably just as well. What? He said, I know someone called Sophie who looks a little like you. And Letty said, That's my sister, without thinking. Percival said. She got terribly worried then, particularly as Howl went on asking about her sister. Letty said she could have bitten her tongue off. The day you came there, she was being nice to Howl in order to find out how he knew you. Howl said you were an old woman, and Mrs. Fairfax said she'd seen you. Letty cried and cried. She said something terrible has happened to Sophie, and the worst of it is she'll think she's safe from Howl. Sophie's too kind herself to see how heartless Howl is, and she was so upset I managed to turn into a man long enough to say I'll go and keep an eye on you. Sophie spread weed-killer in a great smoking arc. Bother Letty! It's very kind of her, and I love her dearly for it. I've been quite as worried about her, but I do not need a watchdog. Yes, you do, said Percival. Or you did. I arrived far too late. Sophie swung around, weed-killer and all. Percival had to leap into the grass and run for his life behind the nearest tree. The grass died in a long brown swathe behind him as he ran. "Curse everyone!" Sophie cried out. I've done with a lot of you." She dumped the smoking watering can in the middle of the drive and marched off through the weeds towards the stone gateway. "Too late," she muttered as she marched. "What nonsense! Hal's not only heartless, he's impossible. Besides," she added, "I am an old woman." But she could not deny that something had been wrong ever since the moving castle moved, or even before that. And it seemed to tie up with the way Sophie seemed so mysteriously unable to face either of her sisters. "And all the things I told the king are true," she went on. She was going to march several leagues on her own 2 feet and not come back. Show everyone. Who cared that poor Mrs. Penstemon had relied on Sophie to stop Howl from going to the bed? Sophie was a failure anyway. It came with being the eldest. And Mrs. Penstemon had thought Sophie was Hal's loving old mother anyway, hadn't she? Or had she? Uneasily, Sophie realized that a lady whose trained eye could detect a charm sewn into a suit could surely even more easily detect the stronger magic of the witch's spell. "Oh, confound that gray and scarlet suit," Sophie said. "I refuse to believe that I was the one that got caught with it." The trouble was the blue and silver suit seemed to have worked just the same. She stumped a few steps further. "Anyway," she said with great relief, "Hal doesn't like me." This reassuring thought would have been enough to keep Sophie walking all night, had not the sudden familiar uneasiness swept over her. Her ears caught a distant tuck, tuck, tuck. She looked sharply under the low sun, and there, on the road which wound away behind the stone gate, was a distant figure with outstretched arms, hopping, hopping. Sophie picked up her skirts, whirled around, and sped back the way she came. Dust and gravel flew up around her in clouds. Percival was standing forlornly in the driveway beside the bucket and the watering can. Sophie seized him and dragged him behind the nearest trees. "Is something wrong?" he said. "Quiet! It's that dreaded scarecrow again," Sophie gasped. She shut her eyes. "We're not here," she said. "You can't find us. Go away. Go away fast. Fast. Fast." "But why?" Percival said. "Shut up! Not here. Not here. Not here," Sophie said desperately. She opened one eye. The scarecrow, almost between the gate posts, was standing still, swaying uncertainly. "That's right," said Sophie. "We're not here. Go away fast. Twice as fast. 3 times as fast. 10 times as fast. Go away!" And the scarecrow hesitantly swayed around on a stick and began hopping back up the road. After the first few hops, it was going in giant leaps, faster and faster, just as Sophie had told it to. Sophie hardly breathed and did not let go of Percival's sleeve until the scarecrow was out of sight. "What's wrong with it?" said Percival. "Why didn't you want it?" Sophie shuddered. Since the scarecrow was out on the road, she did not dare leave now. She picked up the watering can and stumped back to the mansion. A fluttering caught her eye as she went. She looked up at the building. The flutter was from long white curtains below from an open French window beyond the statues of the terrace. The statues were now clean white stones, and she could see curtains as most of the windows, and glass too. The shutters were now folded properly beside them, newly painted white. Not a green stain nor a blister marked the new creamy plaster of the house front. The front door was a masterpiece of black paint and gold scrollwork, centering on a gilded lion with a ring in its mouth for a door knocker. "Huh," said Sophie. She resisted the temptation to go through the open window and explore. That was what Howl wanted her to do. She marched straight into the front door, seized the gold doorknob, and threw it open with a crash. Howl and Michael were at the bench hastily dismantling a spell. Part of it must have been to change the mansion, but the rest, as Sophie well knew, had to be a listening-in spell of some kind. As Sophie stormed in, both of their faces shot nervously around towards her. Calcifer instantly plunged down under his logs. "Keep behind me, Michael," said Howl. "Eavesdropper!" Sophie shouted. "Snooper!" "What's wrong?" said Howl. "Do you want the shutters black and gold too?" "You barefaced!" Sophie stuttered. That wasn't the only thing you heard. You... How long have you known that I am... "Under a spell?" said Howl. "Well, now, I told him," Michael said, looking nervously around Howl. "My Letty..." "You!" Sophie shrieked. "The other Letty let the cat out of the bag too," Howl said quickly. "You know she did. and Mrs. Fairfax talked a great deal that day. There was a time where everyone seemed to be telling me. Even Calcifer did when I asked him. But do you honestly think I don't know my own business as well enough to spot a strong spell like that when I see it? As I had several goes at taking it off of you when you weren't looking, but nothing seems to work. I took you to Miss Penstemon, hoping she could do something, but she evidently couldn't. I came to the conclusion that you liked being in disguise. Disguise! Sophie yelled. Hal laughed at her. I must be, since you're doing it yourself, he said. What a strange family you are. Is your name really Letty too? This was too much for Sophie. Percival edged nervously in just then, carrying the half-full bucket of weed killer. Sophie dropped her can, seized the bucket from him, and threw it at Hal. Hal ducked. Michael dodged the bucket. The weed killer went up in a sheet of sizzling green flame from floor to ceiling. The bucket clammed into the sink, where all the remaining flowers died instantly. Ow! Calcifer said from under his logs. That was strong. Hal carefully picked the skull out from under all the smoking brown remains of the flowers and dried it on one of his sleeves. Of course it was strong, he said. Sophie never does things by halves. The skull, as Hal wiped it, became bright new white, and the sleeve he was using developed a faded blue and silver patch. Hal set the skull on the bench and looked at his sleeve, ruefully. Sophie had half a mind to stump straight out of the castle again, and away down the drive. There was the scarecrow. She settled for stumping into the chair instead, where she sat and fell into a deep sulk. I'm not going to speak to any of them, she thought. Sophie, said Hal, I did my best. Haven't you noticed that your aches and pains have been better lately, too? Or do you enjoy having those? Sophie did not answer, and Hal gave her up, and turned to Percival. I'm glad to see you have some brain after all, he said. You had me worried. Hi, Regan! Thank you for stopping by! I hope you can enjoy the stream while you're staying here. Thank you for stopping by. I'm happy that you did. Glad to see you have some brains after all, he said. You had me worried. I really don't remember much, Percival said, but he stopped behaving like a half-wit. He picked up the guitar and tuned it. He had it sounding much nicer in seconds. My sorrow was revealed, Hal said pathetically. I was born an unmusical Welshman. Did you tell Sophie all of it, or do you really not know what the witch was trying to find out? She wanted to know more about Wales, said Percival. I thought it was that. Hal said somberly. Well. He went away to the bathroom, where he was gone for the next 2 hours. During that time, Percival played a number of tunes on the guitar in a slow, thoughtful way, as if he was teaching himself how to, while Michael crawled about the floor with a smoking rag, trying to get rid of the weed killer. Sophie sat in the chair and said not a word. Calcifer kept bobbing up and peeping at her, and going down again under his logs. Hal came out of the bathroom with his suit glossy back, his hair glossy white, and with a cloud of steam smelling of gentians. I may be back quite late, he said to Michaels. It's going to be Midsummer Day after midnight, and the witch may well try something. So keep all the defenses up, and remember all I told you, please. All right, said Michael, putting the steaming remains of the rag into the sink. Hal turned to Percival. I think I know what's happened to you, he said. It's going to be a fair job sorting you out, but I'll have a go at it after I get back, tomorrow. Hal went to the door and stopped with his hand on the knob. Sophie, are you still not talking to me? He asked miserably. Sophie knew Hal could sound unhappy in heaven if it suited him, and he had just used her to get information out of Percival. No, she snarled. Hal sighed and went out. Sophie looked up and saw that the knob was pointed black down. That does it, she thought. I don't care if it's Midsummer's Day tomorrow. I'm leaving. Chapter 20. Tea. Tea with honey. Chapter 20, in which Sophie finds further difficulties in leaving the castle. Midsummer Day dawned. About the same moment that it did, Hal crashed through the door with such a noise that Sophie shut up in her cubbyhole, convinced that the witch was hot on his heels. They think so much about me that they always play without me, Hal bellowed. Sophie realized that he was only trying to sing House of Her Saucepans song and laid down again, whereupon Hal fell over the chair and caught his foot into the stool so that it shot across the room. After that, he tried to go upstairs to the broom cupboard and then the yard. This seemed to puzzle him a little, but finally he discovered the stairs, all except the bottom one, and fell up them on his face. The whole castle shook. What's the matter? Sophie asked, sticking her head through the banister. Rugby club reunion, Hal replied with thick dignity. Didn't know I used to fly up the wing for my university, did you, Mrs. Nosy? If you were trying to fly, you must have forgotten how, said Sophie. I was born to strange sights, said Hal. Things invisible to see, and I was just on my way to bed when you interrupted me. I know where all the Passierds are, and who cleft the devil's foot. Go to bed, you fool, Calcifer said sleepily. You're drunk. Who, me? Said Hal. I assure you, my friends, I am cold-souled Stober. He got up and stalked upstairs, feeling for the wall as if he thought it might escape him unless he kept it in his touch. His bedroom door did escape him. What a lie that was, Hal remarked as he walked into the wall. My shining dishonesty will be the salvation of me. He walked into the wall several more times in several different places before he discovered his bedroom door and crashed his way through it. Sophie could hear him falling about, saying that his bed was dodging. He is quite impossible, Sophie said, and she decided to leave at once. Unfortunately, the noise Hal made woke Michael up, and Percival, who was sleeping on the floor in Michael's room. Michael came downstairs saying they were so thoroughly awake that they might as well go out and gather the flowers for midsummer garlands while the day was still cool. Sophie was not sorry to go out into the place of flowers for one last time. There was a warm, milky haze out there, filled with scents and half-hidden colors. Sophie thumped along, testing the squashy ground with her stick, and listening to the whirrings and twitters of thousands of birds, feeling truly regretful. She stroked a moist satin lily and fingered one of the ragged purple flowers with long, powdery stamens. She looked back at the tall black castle breasting the mist behind them. She sighed. He made it much better, Percival remarked as he put an armful of hibiscus into Michael's floating bath. Who did? Said Michael. How? Said Percival. There were only bushes at first, and they were quite small and dry. You remember being here before? Michael asked excitedly. He had by no means given up his idea that Percival might be Prince Justin. I think I was here with the witch, Percival said doubtfully. They fetched 2 bathloads of flowers. Sophie noticed that when they came in the second time, Michael had spun the knob over the door several times. That must have something to do with keeping the witch out. But of course, there were the midsummer garlands to make. That took a long time. Sophie had meant to leave Michael and Percival to do that, but Michael was too busy asking Percival cutting questions, and Percival was very slow at the work. Sophie knew what made Michael excited. There was a sort of air about Percival, as if he expected something to happen soon. It made Sophie wonder just how much in the power of the witch he still was. She had to make most of the garlands. Any thoughts she might have about staying and helping Howl against the witch vanished. Howl, who could have made all the garlands just by waving his hand, was now snoring so loudly he could hear him right through the shop. They were so long making garlands that it was time to open the shop before they had finished. Michael fetched them bread and honey, and they ate while they dealt with the tremendous first rush of customers. Although Midsummer's Day, in the way of holidays, it turned out to be a gray and chilly day in market shipping, half the town came, dressed in fine holiday clothes, to buy flowers and garlands for the festival. There was the usual jostling crowd out in the street. So many people came to the shop that it was getting on for midday before Sophie finally stole away up the stairs through the broom cupboard. They had taken so much money, Sophie thought as she stole about, packing up some food and her clothes in a bundle, that Michael's hoard under the hearthstone would be 10 times the size. Have you come to talk to me? asked Calcifer. In a moment, Sophie said, crossing the room with her bundle behind her back. She did not want Calcifer raising an outcry about that contract. She stretched out her hand to hook her stick from the chair, and somebody knocked at the door. Sophie stuck, with a hand outstretched, looking inquiringly at Calcifer. "It's the mansion door," said Calcifer. "Flesh and blood and harmless." The knocking came again. This always happens when I try to leave, Sophie thought. She turned a knob orange side down and opened the door. There was a carriage in the drive beyond the statues, pulled by a goodish pair of horses. Sophie could see it round the edges of a very large footman who had been doing the knocking. Mrs. Sakerville Smith Mrs. Sakerville Smith to call upon the new occupants, said the footman. How very awkward, Sophie thought. It was not the result of Howl's new paint and curtains. We're not at home, she began, but Mrs. Sakerville Smith swept the footman aside and came in. Wait with the carriage, Theobald, she said to the footman as she sailed past Sophie, folding her parasol. It was Fanny. Fanny looking wonderfully prosperous in cream silk. She was wearing a cream silk hat trimmed with roses, which Sophie remembered only too well. She remembered what she had said to that hat as she trimmed it. You are going to have to marry money. And it was quite clear from the look of her that Fanny had. Oh dear, said Fanny, looking around. There must be some mistake. This is the servants' quarters. Well, we're really not quite moved in yet, madam, Sophie said, and wondered how Fanny would feel if she knew that the old hat shop was just beyond the broom cupboard. Fanny turned around and gasped and gaped at Sophie. Sophie! She exclaimed. Oh, good gracious, child, what happened to you? You look about 90. Have you been very ill? And to Sophie's surprise, Fanny threw aside her hat and her parasol in all of her grand manner and flung her arms around Sophie and wept. Oh, I didn't know what happened to you, she sobbed. I went to Martha and I sent to Letty, and neither of them knew. They changed places, silly girls. Did you know? Oh, but nobody knew a thing about you. I've a reward out still, and here you are, working as a servant when you could be living in luxury up the hill with me and Mr. Smith. Sophie found she was crying as well. She hurriedly dropped her bundle and led Fanny to the chair. She pulled a stool up and sat beside Fanny, holding her hand. But this time they were both laughing as well as crying. They were most powerfully glad to see one another again. It's a long story, Sophie said after Fanny had asked her 6 times what had happened to her. When I looked in the mirror I saw myself like this. I was in such a shock I sort of wandered away. Overwork, said Fanny wretchedly. How I blame myself. Not really, said Sophie. And you mustn't worry, because Wizard Howl took me in. Wizard Howl! Exclaimed Fanny. That wicked, wicked man! Has he done this to you? Where is he? Let me at him! She seized her parasol and became very warlike that Sophie had to hold her down. Sophie did not care to think how Howl might react if Fanny woke him by stabbing him with her parasol. No, no, she said. Howl has been very kind to me. And this was true, Sophie realized. Howl showed his kindness rather strangely, but considering all Sophie had done to annoy him, he had been very good to her indeed. But they say he eats women alive, Fanny said, struggling to get up. Sophie held down her waving parasol. He doesn't really, she said. Do listen. He's not wicked at all. There was a bit of fizz from the grate at this, where Calcifer was watching with some interest. He isn't, Sophie said to Calcifer as much as to Fanny. And all the time I've been here, I have not seen him work a single evil spell. Which again was true, she knew. Then I'll have to believe you, Fanny said, relaxing. Though I'm sure it must be your doing if he's reformed. You always did have a way with you, Sophie. You could stop Martha's tantrums when I couldn't do a thing with her. And I always said it was thanks to you that Letty only got her own way half the time instead of all the time. But you should have told me where you were, love. Sophie knew she should have. She had taken Martha's view of Fanny, whole and entire, when she should have known Fanny better. She was ashamed. Fanny could not wait to tell Sophie about Mr. Sakerville Smith. She launched into a long and very excited account of how she met Mr. Smith the very week Sophie had left, and married him before the week was out. Sophie watched her as she talked. Being old gave her an entirely new view of Fanny. She was a lady who was still young and pretty, and she had found the hat shop as boring as Sophie did. But she had stuck with it and done her best, both with the hat shop and with the 3 girls, until Mr. Hatter died. Then she had suddenly been afraid, just as she was just like Sophie, old with no reason and nothing to show for it. And then, with you not being there to pass it on out, there seemed no reason not to sell the shop, Fanny was saying, when there was a clatter of feet in the broom cupboard. Michael came through saying, "We shut the shop, and look who's here!" He was holding Martha's hand. Martha was thinner and fairer and almost looked like herself again. She let go of Michael and rushed to Sophie, shouting, "Sophie, you should have told me!" while she flung her arms around her. Then she flung her arms around Fanny, just as if she had never said all those things about her before. But this was not all. Letty and Mrs. Fairfax came through the cupboard after Martha, carrying a hamper between them, and after them came Percival, who looked livelier than Sophie had ever seen him. "We came over by carrier at first light," said Mrs. Fairfax, "and we brought... Bless me! It's Fanny!" She dropped her end of the hamper and ran to hug Fanny. Letty dropped her end and ran to hug Sophie. In fact, there was such a general hugging and exclaiming and shouting that Sophie thought it was a marvel Howl did not wake up. But she could hear him snoring even through the shouting. "I shall have to leave this evening," she thought. She was too glad to see everyone to consider going before that. Letty was very fond of Percival. While Michael carried the hamper to the bench and unpacked cold chickens and wines and honey puddings from it, Letty hung on to Percival's arm in an owner-like way that Sophie could not quite approve of, and made him tell her all that he remembered. Percival did not seem to mind. Letty looked so lovely that Sophie did not blame him. He just arrived and kept turning into a man and then into different dogs and insisting that he knew me," Letty said to Sophie. "I knew I'd never seen him before, but it didn't matter." She patted Percival's shoulder as if he was still a dog. But you had met Prince Justin," Sophie said. "Oh, yes," said Letty offhandedly. "Mind you, he was in disguise in a green uniform, but it was obviously him. He was so smooth and courtly, even when he was annoyed about the finding spells. I had to make him up 2 lots because they were keep showing that Wizard Solomon was somewhere between us and Market Chipping, and he swore that couldn't be true. And all the time I was doing them, he kept interrupting me, calling me sweet lady in a sarcastic sort of way, and asking me who I was and where my family lived and how old I was. I thought it was cheek. I'd rather have Wizard Howl, and not saying something." By this time everyone was milling about, eating chicken and sipping wine. Calcifer seemed to be shy. He had gone down to Green Flickers and nobody seemed to notice him. Sophie wanted him to meet Letty. She tried to coax him out. "Is that really the demon who has charge of Hall's life?" Letty said, looking down at the Green Flickers rather disbelievingly. Sophie looked up to assure Letty that Calcifer was real, and saw Miss Angorian standing by the door, looking shy and uncertain. "Oh, do excuse me. I've come at a bad time, haven't I?" Miss Angorian said. "I just wanted to talk to Howl." Sophie stood up, not quite sure what to do. She was ashamed of the way she had driven Miss Angorian out before. It was only because she knew Howl was courting Miss Angorian. On the other hand, that did not mean she had to like her. Michael took things out of Sophie's hand by greeting Miss Angorian with a beaming smile and a shout of welcome. "Howl's asleep at the moment," he said. "Come and have a glass of wine while you wait." "How kind," said Miss Angorian. But it was plain that Miss Angorian was not happy. She refused wine and wandered nervously about, nibbling at a leg of chicken. The room was full of people who all knew one another very well, and she was the outsider. Fanny did not help by turning from non-stop talk with Mrs. Fairfax and saying, "What peculiar clothes!" Martha did not help either. She had seen how admiringly Michael greeted Miss Angorian. She went and made sure that Michael did not talk to anyone but herself and Sophie, and Letty ignored Miss Angorian and went to sit on the stairs with Percival. Miss Angorian seemed rather quickly to decide she had enough. Sophie saw her at the door trying to open it. She hurried over, feeling very guilty. After all, Miss Angorian must have felt very strongly about how to have come here at all. Please do not go yet," Sophie said. "I'll go and wake Howl up." "Oh, no, you mustn't do that," said Miss Angorian, smiling nervously. "I've got the day off, and I'm quite happy to wait. I thought I'd go and explore outside. It's rather stuffy in here with that funny green fire burning. It seemed to Sophie that perfect way to get rid of Miss Angorian without really getting rid of her. She politely opened the door for her. Somehow, maybe it had to do with the fences Hal had asked Michael to keep up. The knob had gotten turned round to purple down. Outside was a misty blaze of sun and the drifting banks of red and purple flowers. What gorgeous rhododendrons! Miss Angorian exclaimed in her huskiest and most throbbing voice. I must look. She sprang eagerly down the marshy grass. Don't go towards the southwest, Sophie called after her. The castle was drifting off sideways. Miss Angorian buried her beautiful face in a cluster of white flowers. I won't go far at all, she said. Good gracious, Fanny said, coming up the way behind Sophie. Whatever has happened to my carriage? Sophie explained as far as she could, but Fanny was so worried that Sophie had to turn the orange knob down and open it to show the mansion drive in a much grayer day, where the footman and Fanny's coachman were sitting on the roof of the carriage eating cold sausage and playing cards. Only then would Fanny believe that her carriage had not been mysteriously spirited away. Sophie was trying to explain, without really knowing herself, how one door could open on several different places, where Calcifer surged up from his logs, roaring. Howl! He roared, filling the chimney with blue flame. Howl! Howl, Jenkins! The witch has found your sister's family! There were 2 violent thumps overheard. Hal's bedroom door crashed, and Hal came tearing downstairs. Letty and Percival were hurled out of his way. Fanny screamed faintly at the sight of him. Hal's hair was like a haystack, and there were red rims around his eyes. Got me on my weak flank! Blast her! He shouted as she shot across the room, his black sleeves flying. I was afraid she would. Thanks, Calcifer! He shoved Fanny aside and hurled open the door. Sophie heard the door bang behind Howl as she hobbled upstairs. She knew it was nosy, but she had to see what happened. As she hobbled through Hal's bedroom, she heard everyone else following her. What a filthy room! Fanny exclaimed. Sophie looked out the window. It was drizzling in the neat garden. The swing was hung with drops. The witch, waving her mane of red hair, was all dewed with it. She stood leaning against the swing, tall and commanding in her red robes, beckoning and beckoning again. Hal's niece, Maudie, was shuffling over the wet grass towards the witch. She did not look as if she wanted to go, but she seemed to have no choice. Behind her, Hal's nephew Neil was shuffling towards the witch even more slowly, glorying in the most ferocious way. And Hal's sister Megan was behind the 2 children. Sophie could see Megan's arms gesturing and Megan's mouth opening and shutting. She was clearly giving the witch a piece of her mind, but she was being drawn towards the witch too. Howl burst out onto the lawn. He had not bothered to alter his clothes. He did not bother to do any magic. He just charged straight at the witch. The witch made a grab for Mari, but Mari was still too far away. Howl got to Mari first, slung her behind him, and charged on. And the witch ran. She ran like a cat with a dog after it, across the lawn and over the neat fence in a flurry of flame-colored robes, with Howl, like the chasing dog, a foot or so behind and closing. The witch vanished over the fence in a red blur. Howl went after her in a black blur with trailing sleeves. Then the fence hid both of them from sight. I hope he catches her, said Martha. The little girl is crying. Down below, Megan put her arms around Mari and took both her children indoors. There was no knowing what happened to Howl and the witch. Lydia and Percival and Martha and Michael went back downstairs. Fanny and Mrs. Fairfax were transfixed with the disgusting state of Howl's room. Look at those spiders, said Mrs. Fairfax. And the dust on those curtains, said Fanny. Annabel, I saw some brooms in that passage you just came through. Let's get them, said Mrs. Fairfax. I'll pin that dress up for you, Fanny, and we'll get to work. I can't bear our room to be in this state. Oh, poor Howl, Sophie thought. He does love those spiders. She hovered on the stairs, wondering how to stop Mrs. Fairfax and Fanny. From downstairs, Michael called, Sophie! We're going to look around the mansion. Want to come? That seemed the ideal thing to stop the 2 ladies from cleaning. Sophie called Fanny and hobbled hurriedly downstairs. Letty and Percival were already opening the door. Letty had not listened when Sophie explained it to Fanny, and it was clear that Percival did not understand either. Sophie saw they were opening a purple down by mistake. They got it open as Sophie hobbled across the room to put it right. The scarecrow loomed up the doorway the scarecrow loomed up in the doorway against the flowers. "Shut it!" Sophie screamed. She saw what had happened. She actually helped the scarecrow last night by telling him to go 10 times as fast. It had simply sped into the castle entrance and tried to get in there. But Miss Angorian was out there. Sophie wondered if she was laying in the bushes in a dead faint. "No, don't," she said weakly. No one was attending to her anyway. Letty's face was the color of Fanny's dress, and she was clutching Martha. Percival was standing, staring, and Michael was trying to catch the skull, which was yattering his teeth so hard that it threatened to fall off the bench and take a wine bottle with it. And the skull seemed to have a strange effect on the guitar, too. It was giving out a long, humming twangs. Twang, 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 twang. Calcifer flamed up the chimney again. "The thing is speaking," he said to Sophie. "It's saying that it means no harm. I think it's speaking the truth. It is waiting for your permission to come in." Certainly the scarecrow was standing there. He was not trying to barge inside as it had before, and Calcifer must have trusted it. He had stopped the castle moving. Sophie looked at the turnip face and the fluttering rags. It was not so frightening after all. She once had fellow feeling for it. She rather suspected she had just made it into a convenient excuse not to leave the castle because she really wanted to stay. Now there was no point. Sophie had to leave anyway. Howl preferred Miss Angorian. "Please come in," she said a little croakily. "Again," said the guitar. The scarecrow surged into the room with one powerful sideways hop. It stood swinging about on its one leg, as if it was looking for something. The smell of flowers it had brought in with it did not hide its own smell of dust and rotting turnip. The skull yattered under Michael's fingers again. The scarecrow spun around, gladly, and fell sideways towards it. Michael made one attempt to rescue the skull, and then got hastily out of the way, for as the scarecrow fell across the bench, there came a fizzing jolt of strong magic, and the skull melted into the scarecrow's turnip head. It seemed to get inside the turnip and fill it out. There was a now strong suggestion of a rather craggy face on the turnip. The trouble was, it was on the back of the scarecrow. The scarecrow gave a wooden scramble, hopped upright uncertainly, then swiftly spun its body around so that the front of it was under the craggy turnip face. Slowly, it eased its outstretched arms down to its side. "Now I can speak," it said in a somewhat mushy voice. "I may faint," announced Fanny on the stairs. "Nonsense," said Mrs. Fairfax behind Fanny. "The thing's only a magician's golem. It has to do what it was sent to do. They're quite harmless." Letty, all the same, looked ready to faint, but the one who did faint was Percival. He flopped to the floor, quite quietly, and lay curled up as if he were asleep. Letty, in spite of her terror, ran towards him, only to back away as the scarecrow gave another hop and stood itself in front of Percival. "This is one of the parts I was sent to find," it said in its mushy voice. It swung its stick until it was facing Sophie. "I must thank you," it said. "My skull was far away when I ran out of strength before I reached it. I would have laid in that hedge forever if you had not come and talked life into me." It sold to Mrs. Fairfax and then to Letty. "I thank you both, too." Who sent you? What are you supposed to do?" Sophie said. The scarecrow swung around uncertainly. "More than this," it said. "There are still parts missing." Everyone waited, most of them too shaken to speak, while the scarecrow rotated this way and that, seemingly thinking. "What is Percival a part of?" Sophie said. "Let it collect itself," said Calcifer. "No one's asked it to explain itself before—" He suddenly stopped speaking and shrank until a barely a green flame showed. Michael and Sophie exchanged alarmed glances. Then a new voice spoke, out of nowhere. It was enlarged and muffled, as if it were speaking into a box, but it was unmistakably the voice of the witch. "Michael Fisher," it said, "tell your master Howl that he fell for my decoy. I now have the woman called Lillian Gorian in my fortress, in the waste. Tell him I will only let her go if he comes to fetch her himself. Is that clear, Michael Fisher? The scarecrow whirled around and hopped for the door. Oh no! Michael cried out. Stop it! The witch must have sent it so that she can get in. The witch must have sent it so she can get in here. Chapter 21, in which a contract is concluded before witnesses. Most people ran after the scarecrow. Sophie ran the other way, through the broom cupboard and into the shop, grabbing her stick as she went. This is my fault, she murmured. I have a genius for doing things wrong. I could have kept Miss Gorian indoors. I only needed to talk to her politely, poor thing. Hal may have forgiven me for a lot of things, but he's not going to forgive me for this in a hurry. In the flower shop, she hauled the 7-league boots out the window display and emptied the hibiscus, roses, and water out of them onto the floor. She unlocked the shop door and pointed the wet boots out onto the crowded pavement. Excuse me, she said to various shoes and trailing sleeves that were walking in her way. She looked up at the sun, which was not easy to find in the cloudy gray sky. Let's see, southeast, that way. Excuse me, she said, clearing a small space for the boots among the holiday makers. She put them down, pointing the right way. Then she stepped into them and began to stride. Zip, 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 zip. It was as quick as that, and even more blurred and breathless in both boots than in one. Sophie had brief glimpses between the long double strides of the mansion down at the end of the valley, gleaming between trees with Fanny's carriage at the door, of bracken on the hillside, of a small river facing down into a green valley, of the same river sliding into a much broader valley, of the same valley turning so wide it seemed endless and blue in the distance, and a towery pile far, far off that might have been Kingsbury, of the plain narrowing towards the mountains again, of a mountain which slanted so steeply under her boot that she stumbled in spite of her stick, which stumble brought her to the edge of a deep blue misted gorge, with the tops of trees far below, where she had to take another stride or fall in. She landed on a crumbly yellow sand. She dug her stick in and looked carefully around. Behind her right shoulder, some miles off, a white steamy mist almost hid the mountain that she just zipped through. Below the mist was a band of dark green. Sophie nodded. Though she could not see the moving castle this far away, she was sure the mist marked the place with flowers. She took another careful stride. Zip! It was fearsomely hot. The clay-yellow sand stretched in all directions, now shimmering in the heat. Rocks lay about in a messy way. The only growing things were the occasional dismal gray bushes. The mountains looked like clouds coming up on the horizon. If this was the waste, Sophie said, with sweat running all in her wrinkles, then I feel sorry for the witch to have lived here. She took another stride. The wind of it did not cool her down at all. The rocks and bushes were the same, but the sand was grayer, and the mountains seemed to have sunk down into the sky. Sophie peered into the quivering gray glare ahead, where she thought she could see something rather higher than rock. She took one more stride. Now it was like an oven, but there was a peculiar-shaped pile about a quarter of a mile off, standing on a slight rise in the rock-littered land. It was a fantastical shape of twisted little towers, rising to one main tower that pointed slightly askew, like a naughty old finger. Sophie climbed out of the boots. It was too hot to carry anything so heavy, so she trudged off to investigate with only her stick. The thing seemed to be made of yellow-gray grit of the waste. At first Sophie wondered if it might be some strange kind of ant's nest, but as she got nearer, she could see that it was as if something had fused together thousands of grainy yellow flower pots into a tapering heap. She grinned. The moving castle had often struck her as being remarkably like the inside of a chimney. This building was really a collection of chimney pots. It had to be the fire demon's work. As Sophie panted up the rise, there was suddenly no doubt that this was the witch's fortress. Two small orange figures came out of a dark space at the bottom and stood waiting for her. She recognized the witch's two page boys. Hot and breathless as she was, she tried to speak them politely to show she had no quarrel with them. "Good afternoon," she said. They just gave her sulky looks. One bowed and held out his hand, pointing towards the misshapen archway between the bent columns of chimney pots. Sophie shrugged and followed him inside. The other page walked after her, and of course the entrance vanished as soon as she was through. Sophie shrugged again. She would have to deal with that problem when she came back. She rearranged her lace shawl, straightened her draggled skirts, and walked forward. It was a little like going through the castle door with a knob blacked down. There was a moment of nothingness, followed by murky light. The light came from a greenish yellow flames that had burned and flickered all around her, but in a shadowy way which gave no heat and very little light either. When Sophie looked at them, the flames were never where she was looking, but always to the side. But that was the way of magic. Sophie shrugged again and followed the page this way and that among the skinny pillars of the same chimney pot kind as the rest of the building. At length, the pages led her to a sort of central den, or maybe it was just a space between pillars. Sophie was confused by then. The fortress seemed enormous, though she suspected it was all just deceptive, just as the castle was. The witch was standing there waiting. Again, it was hard to tell how Sophie knew, except that it could be no one else. The witch was hugely tall and skinny now, and her hair was fair, and a rope-like pigtail over one bony shoulder. She wore a white dress. When Sophie walked straight up to her, brandishing her stick, the witch backed away. "I am not to be threatened," the witch said, sounding tired and frail. Then give me Miss Angorian, and you won't be," said Sophie. "I will take her and go away." The witch backed away further, gesturing with both hands. As the page boys both melted into sticky orange blobs, which rose in the air and flew towards Sophie. "Yuck! Get off!" Sophie cried, beating at them with her stick. The orange blobs did not seem to care for her stick. They dodged it and wove about, and then darted behind Sophie. She was thinking she had got the better of them when she found herself glued to a chimney pot pillar by them. Orange sticky stuff stranded between her ankles when she tried to move, and plucked at her hair quite painfully. "I'd almost rather have green slime," Sophie said. I hope those weren't real boys." Only emanations," said the witch. "Let me go," said Sophie. "No," said the witch. She turned away and seemed to lose interest in Sophie entirely. Sophie began to fear that, as usual, she made a mess of things. The sticky stuff seemed to be getting harder and more elastic every second. When she tried to move, it snapped her back against the pottery pillar. "Where's Miss Angorian?" she said. "You will not find her," said the witch. "We will wait till Howl comes." "He's not coming," said Sophie. "He's got more sense, and your curse hasn't worked anyway." "Oh, it will," said the witch, smiling slightly. "Now that you have fallen for our deception and come here, Howl will have no choice but to be honest for once." She made another gesture towards the murky flames this time, and a sort of throne trundled out from between the pillars and stopped in front of the witch. There was a man sitting in it, wearing a green uniform and long, shiny boots. Sophie thought he was asleep at first, with his head out of sight sideways, but the witch gestured again. The man sat straight up, and he had no head on his shoulders at all. Sophie realized she was looking at all that was left of Prince Justin. "If I was Fanny," Sophie said, "I'd threaten to faint. Put his head back at once. He looks terrible like that." I disposed of both heads months ago," said the witch. "I sold Mr. Sullivan's skull when I sold his guitar. Prince Justin's head is walking around somewhere with the other leftover parts. This body is a perfect mixture of Prince Justin and Wizard Sullivan. It is waiting for Howl's head to make our perfect human. And when we have Howl's head, we shall have the new king of Inguri, and I shall rule as queen." "You're mad," Sophie said. "You have no right to make jigsaws of people, and I shouldn't think Howl's head would do a thing you want. It'll slither out somehow." "Howl will do exactly as we say," the witch said with a sly, secretive smile. "We shall control his fire demon." Sophie realized she was very scared indeed. She knew she had made a mess of things now. "Where is Miss Angorian?" she said, waving her stick. The witch did not like Sophie to wave her stick. She stepped backwards. "I am very tired," she said. "You people keep spoiling my plans. First, Wizard Solomon will not come near the waste, so I had to threaten Princess Valeria in order to make the king order him out here. Then when he came, he grew trees. Then the king would not let Prince Justin follow Solomon for months, And when he did follow, the silly fool went up north somewhere for some reason, and I had to use all my arts to get him here. Howl has caused me even more trouble. He got away once, and I had to use a curse to bring him in. And while I was finding out enough about him to lay the curse, you got into what was left of Solomon's brain and caused me even more trouble. And now when I bring you here, you wave your silly stick and argue. I have worked very hard for this moment. I am not to be argued with. She turned away and wandered off into the murk. Sophie stared after the tall white figure moving among the dim flames. I think her age has caught up with her, she thought. She's crazy. I must get loose and rescue Miss Angorian from her somehow. Remembering that orange stuff had avoided her stick just as the witch had, Sophie reached back over her shoulder with her stick and wagged it back and forth toward the sticky stuff met the pottery pillar. "Get out of it," she said. "Let me go." Her hair dragged painfully, but stringy orange bits began to fly sideways. Sophie wagged the stick harder. She had worked her head and shoulders loose when there came a dull booming sound. The pale flames wavered and the pillar behind Sophie shook. Then with a crash like 1,000 tea sets falling down, a piece of the fortress wall blew out. Light blinded through a long jagged hole, and a figure came leaping through the opening. Sophie turned eagerly, hoping it was Howl. But the black outline only had one leg. It was the scarecrow again. The witch gave a yowl of rage and rushed toward it with her fair pigtail flying and her bony arms stretched out. The scarecrow leaped at her. There was another violent bang, and the two of them were wrapped in a magic cloud, like the cloud over Port Haven when Howl and the witch had fought. The cloud battered this way and that, filling the dusty air with shrieks and booms. Sophie's hair frizzed. The cloud was only yards away, going this way and that among the pottery and pillars, and the break in the wall was quite near too. As Sophie had thought, the fortress really was not big. Each time the cloud moved across the blinding white gap, she could see through it, and see two skinny figures battling in the mist. She stared and kept wagging her stick back and forth. She was loose all except her legs when the cloud screamed across in front of the light one more time. Sophie saw another person leap through the gap behind it. This one had flying black sleeves. It was Howl! Sophie could see the outline of him clearly, standing with his arms folded, watching the battle. For a moment, it looked as if he was going to let the witch and the scarecrow get on with it. Then the long sleeves flapped as Howl raised his arms. Above screaming and booming, Howl's voice shouted one strange long word, and a long roll of thunder came with it. The scarecrow and the witch both jolted. Claps of sound rang round the pottery pillars, echo after echo, and each echo carried some of the cloud of magic away with it. It vanished in a wisp, swirling away in murky eddies. When it had become the thinnest white haze, the tall figure with the pigtail began to totter. The witch seemed to fold in on herself, thinner and whiter than ever. Finally, as the haze faded clean away, she fell in a heap with a small clatter. As a million of soft echoes died, Howl and the scarecrow were left thoughtfully facing one another across the pile of bones. Good, Sophie thought. She slashed her legs free and went across to the headless figure on the throne. It was getting on her nerves. "No, my friend," Howl said to the scarecrow. The scarecrow had hopped right among the bones and was pushing them this way and that with its leg. "No, you won't find her heart here. Her fire demon would have got that. I think it's had the upper hand of her for a long time now. Sad, really." As Sophie took off her shawl and arranged it decently across Prince Justice's headless shoulders, Howl said, "I think the rest of what you are looking for is over here." He hopped towards the throne, and the scarecrow hopped beside him. "Typical," he said to Sophie. "I break my neck to get here, and I find you peacefully tidying up." Sophie looked at him. As she had feared, the hard, black and white daylight coming through the broken wall showed her that Howl had not bothered to shave or tidy his hair. His eyes were still red-rimmed, and his black sleeves were torn in several places. There was not much to choose between Howl and the scarecrow. Oh dear, Sophie thought. He must love Miss Angorian very much. "I came for Miss Angorian," she explained. "And I thought if I arranged for your family to visit you, it would keep you quiet for once," Howl said disgustedly. "But no." Here the scarecrow hopped in front of Sophie. "I was sent by Wizard Solomon," it said in its mushy voice. I was guarded his bushes from the birds in the waste when the witch caught him. He cast all of his magic so that he could spare on me, in order for me to come to his rescue. But the witch had taken him to pieces by then, and the pieces were in various places. It has been a hard task. If you had not come and talked me to life again, I would have failed. It was answering the question Sophie had asked it before they both rushed off. So when Prince Justin ordered finding spells, they must have kept pointing to you, she said. Why was that? To me or to his skull, said the Scarecrow. Between us, we're the best part of him. And Percival is made of Wizard Solomon and Prince Justin, Sophie said. She was not sure Letty was going to like this. The Scarecrow nodded his scraggly turnip face. Both parts told me that the witch and her fire demon were no longer together, and I could defeat the witch on her own. It said, I thank you for giving me 10 times my former speed. Howl waved to the side. Bring that body with you to the castle, he said. I'll sort you out there. Sophie and I have to get back before that fire demon finds a way of getting inside my defenses. He took hold of Sophie's skinny wrist. Come on, where are those 7 big boots? Sophie hung back. But Miss Angorian... Don't you understand? Howl said, dragging at her. Miss Angorian is the fire demon. If it gets inside the castle, then Calcifer has had it, and so have I. Sophie put both hands over her mouth. I knew I made a mess of it, she said. It's been twice already, but it went out. Oh, Lord, groaned Howl. Did it touch anything? The guitar, Sophie admitted. Then it's still there, said Howl. Come on. He pulled Sophie over to the smashed wall. Follow us carefully, he shouted back to the Scarecrow. I'm going to have to raise a wind. No time to look for those boots, he said to Sophie as they climbed over the jagged edges into the hot sunlight. Just run, and keep running, or I won't be able to move you. Sophie helped herself along with her stick and managed to break into a hobbling run, stumbling among the stones. Howl ran beside her, pulling at her. Wind leapt up, whistling and then roaring, hot and gritty, and gray sand climbed around them in the storm that pinged on the pottery fortress. By the time they were not running, but skimming forward in a sort of slow-motion lope, the stony ground sped past beneath them. Dust and grit and thundered around them, high overhead and streaming far away behind. It was very noisy and not at all comfortable, but the waste rocketed past. It's not Calcifer's fault, Sophie yelled. I told him not to say. He wouldn't anyway, Howl shouted back. I knew he never gave away a fellow fire demon. It was always my weakest flank. I thought Wales was, Sophie screamed. No, I left that deliberately, Howl bellowed. I knew I'd be angry enough to stop her if she tried anything there. I had to leave her an opening, see? It's the only chance I had of coming at Prince Justin. So was to use the curse that she put on me to get near her. So you were going to rescue the prince, Sophie shouted. Why did you pretend to run away? To deceive the witch? Not likely, Howl yelled. I'm a coward. Only way I could do something this frightening is to tell myself I'm not doing it. Oh dear, Sophie thought, looking around the swirling grit. He's being honest, and this is a wind. The last bit of the curse has come true. The hot grit hit her thunderously, and Howl's grip hurt. Keep running, Howl bawled. You'll get hurt at this speed. Sophie gasped and made her legs work again. She could see the mountains clearly now, and a line of green below that was the flowering bushes. Even though yellow sand kept swirling in the way, the mountains seemed to grow, and the green line rushed towards them until it was hedge high. All my flanks were weak, Howl shouted. I was relying on Solomon being alive. Then when all seemed to be left of him was Percival, I was so scared I had to go out and get drunk. And then you go and play into the witch's hands. I'm the eldest, Sophie shrieked. I'm a failure. Garbage, shouted Howl. You just never stop to think. Howl was slowing down. Dust kicked up around them in dense clouds. Sophie only knew the bushes were quite near because she could hear the rush and rattle of the gritty wind and leaves. They plunged in among them with a crash, still going so fast that Howl had to swerve and drag Sophie in a long, skimming run across the lake. And you're too nice, he added, above the lap of the water. and the patter of sand on the white lily leaves. I was relying on you being too jealous to let that demon near the place. They hit the steamy shore at a slow run. The bushes on either side of the green lanes thrashed and heaved as they passed, throwing birds and petals in a whirlwind behind them. The castle was drifting down the lane towards them, with its smoke steaming back into the wind. Howl slowed down enough to crash open the door and shot Sophie and himself inside. "Michael!" he shouted. "It wasn't me who let the scarecrow in," Michael said guiltily. Everything seemed to be normal. Sophie was surprised to discover what short time he had really been away. Someone had pulled her bed out from under the stairs, and Percival was lying on it, still unconscious. Letty and Martha and Michael were gathered around it. Overhead, Sophie could hear Mrs. Fairfax's voice and Fanny's comb combined with ominous swishings and thumpings that suggested that Howl's spiders were having a hard time. Howl let go of Sophie and dived towards the guitar. Before he could touch it, it burst with a long, melodious boom. Strings flailed, splinters of wood showered Howl. He was forced to back away, with one tattered sleeve over his face. And Miss Angorian was suddenly standing beside the hearth, smiling. Howl had been right. She must have been in the guitar all this time, waiting for her moment. "Your witch is dead," he said to her. "Isn't that too bad?" Miss Angorian said, quite unconcerned. "Now I can make myself a new human who will be much better. The curse is fulfilled. I can lay a hand on your heart now." And she reached down into the grate and plucked Calcifer out of it. Calcifer wobbled on top of her clenched fist, looking terrified. "Nobody move," Miss Angorian said warningly. Nobody dared stirred. Howl stood stillest of all. "Help," Calcifer said weakly. "Nobody can help you," said Miss Angorian. "You are going to help me control my new human. Let me show you. I only have to tighten my grip." Her hand that was holding Calcifer squeezed until its knuckles showed pale yellow. Howl and Calcifer both screamed. Calcifer beat this way and that in agony. Howl's face turned bluish as he crashed to the floor like a tree falling, where he lay as unconscious as Percival. Sophie did not think he was breathing. Miss Angorian was astonished. He stared at Howl. "He's faking," she said. "No, he's not!" Calcifer screamed, twisted into a writhing spiral shape. "His heart is really quite soft. Let go!" Sophie raised her stick, slowly and gently. This time she thought for an instant before she acted. "Stick," she muttered. "Beat Miss Angorian, but don't hurt anyone else." Then she swung the stick and hit Miss Angorian's tight knuckles with the biggest crack she could. Miss Angorian let out a squealing hiss like a wet log burning and dropped Calcifer. Poor Calcifer rolled helplessly on the floor, flaming sideways and across the flagstones and roaring huskily with terror. Miss Angorian raised a foot to stomp on him. Sophie had to let go of the stick and dive to rescue Calcifer. Her stick, to her surprise, hit Miss Angorian again on its own, and again, and again. But of course it would, Sophie thought. She had talked life into that stick. Mrs. Penstemon had told her so. Miss Angorian hissed and staggered. Sophie stood up holding Calcifer, to find her stick dribbling away at Miss Angorian, smoking with the heat of her. By contrast, Calcifer did not seem very hot. He was milky blue with shock. Sophie could feel the dark lump of Howl's heart was only beating very faintly between her fingers. It had to be Howl's heart she was holding. He had given it away to Calcifer as a part of the contract, to keep Calcifer alive. He must have been very sorry for Calcifer. But all the same, what a silly thing to do. Fanny and Mrs. Fairfax hurried through the door from the stairs, carrying brooms. The sight of them seemed to convince Miss Angorian that she had failed. She ran for the door, with Sophie's stick hovering over her, still clouting at her. "Stop her!" Sophie shouted. "Don't let her get out! Guard all the doors!" Everyone raced to obey. Mrs. Fairfax put herself in the broom cupboard with her brooms raised. Fanny stood on the stairs. Letty jumped up and guarded the door to the yard, and Martha stood by the bathroom. Michael ran for the castle door, but Percival leaped up off the bed and ran for the door too. His face was white and his eyes were shut, but he ran even faster than Michael. He got there first and opened the door. With Calcifer so helpless, the castle had been stopped moving. Miss Angorian saw the bushes standing still in the haze outside and raced for the door with inhuman speed. Before she reached it, it was blocked by the scarecrow looming up with Prince Justin hung across his shoulders, still draped in Sophie's lace shawl. It spread its thick arms across the door, barring the way. Miss Angorian backed away from it. The stick beating at her was on fire now. The metal end was glowing. Sophie realized it could not last much longer. Luckily, Miss Angorian hated it so much that she seized hold of Michael and dragged him in its way. The stick had been told not to hurt Michael. It hovered flamingly. Martha dashed up and tried to pull Michael away. The stick had to avoid her too. Sophie got it wrong as usual. There was no time to waste. "Calcifer," Sophie said, "I shall have to break your contract. Will it kill you?" It would if anyone else broke it," said Calcifer hoarsely. "That's why I asked you to do it. I could tell you could talk life into things. Look at what you did for the scarecrow and skull." "Then have another 1,000 years," Sophie said, and willed very hard as she said it, in case just talking was not enough. This had been worrying her very much. She took hold of Calcifer and carefully nipped him off the black lump, just as she would have nipped a dead bug off a stalk. Calcifer whirled loose and hovered by her shoulder as a blue teardrop. "I feel so light," he said. Then it dawned on him what had happened. "I'm free!" he shouted. He rolled into the chimney and plunged up it, out of sight. "I'm free!" Sophie heard him shout overhead faintly as he came out through the chimney pot of the hat shop. Sophie turned to Howl with the almost dead black lump, feeling doubtful in spite of her hurry. She had to get this right, and she was not sure how she did. "Well, here goes," she said. Kneeling down beside Howl, she carefully put the black lump on his chest in the leftist shoulder place she had felt hers in when it troubled her, and pushed. "Go on in," she told it. "Get in there and work." And as she pushed and pushed, the heart began to sink in and to beat more strongly as it went. Sophie tried to ignore the flames and scuffles by the door and to keep up a steady, firm pressure. Her hair kept getting in the way. It fell across her face in reddish fair hanks, but she tried to ignore that too. She pushed. The heart went in, and as soon as it had disappeared, Hal stirred about. He gave a loud groan and rolled over onto his face. "Hell's teeth," he said. "I've got a hangover." "No, you hit your head on the floor," Sophie said. Hal rose up on his hands and knees with a scramble. "I can't stay," he said. "I've got to rescue that fool, Sophie." "I'm here," said Sophie, shaking his shoulders. "But so is Miss Angorian. Get up and do something about her, quickly!" The stick was entirely flames by now. Martha's hair was frizzling, and it had dawned on Miss Angorian that the scarecrow would burn. She was maneuvering to get the hovering stick to the doorway. As usual, Sophie thought. I didn't think it through. Hal only needed to take one look. He stood up in a hurry. He held out one hand and spoke a sentence of those words that were lost themselves in the claps of thunder. Plaster fell from the ceiling. Everything trembled, but the stick vanished. "I'm afraid not," said Hal. "You've had your time. And by the looks of this, you were trying to get a new heart, too. You were trying to take mine and let Calcifer die, weren't you?" He held the black thing between both palms and pushed his hands together. The witch's old heart crumbled into black sand and soot and nothing. Miss Angorian faded away as it crumbled. As Hal opened his hands empty, the doorway was empty of Miss Angorian too. Another thing happened as well. The moment Miss Angorian was gone, the scarecrow was no longer there either. If Sophie had cared to look, she would have seen two tall men standing in the doorway smiling at one another. The one with the craggy face had ginger hair. The one with the green uniform had vaguer features and a lace shawl draped around his shoulders of his uniform. But Hal turned to Sophie then. "Gray doesn't really suit you," he said. "I thought that when I first saw you." "Calcifer's gone," Sophie said. "I had to break your contract." Hal looked a little sad, but he said, "We were both hoping you would. Neither of us wanted to end up like the witch and Miss Angorian." "Would you call your hair red ginger?" "Would you call your hair ginger?" "Red gold," Sophie said. Not much had changed about Hal that she could see. now that he had his heart back, except maybe that his eyes seemed a deeper color, more like eyes and less like glass marbles. "Unlike some people's," she said. "It's natural." I've never seen why people put such a value on things being natural," Hal said, and Sophie knew that he was scarcely changed at all. If Sophie had any attention to spare, she would have seen Prince Justin and Wizard Solomon shaking hands and clapping one another delightedly on the back. "I'd better get back to my royal brother," Prince Justin said. He walked up to Fanny, as the most likely person, and made her a deep, courtly bow. "Am I addressing the lady of this house?" Not really," Fanny said, trying to hide her broom behind her back. "The lady of the house is Sophie." "Or will be shortly," said Mrs. Fairfax, beaming benevolently. Hal said to Sophie, "I've been wondering all along if you would turn out to be that lovely girl I met on May Day. Why were you so scared then?" If Sophie had been attending, she would have seen Wizard Solomon go up to Letty. Now he was himself, it was clear that Wizard Solomon was at least as strong-minded as Letty was. Letty looked quite nervous as Solomon loomed craggily over her. "It seems to be the prince's memory I had of you and not my own at all," he said. "That's quite all right," Letty said bravely. "It was a mistake." "But it wasn't," protested Wizard Solomon. "Will you let me take you on as my pupil at least?" Letty went fiery red at this and did not seem to know what to say. That seemed to Sophie to be Letty's problem. She had her own. Hal said, "I think we ought to live happily ever after." And she thought he meant it. Sophie knew that living happily ever after with Howl would be a good deal more eventful than any story made it sound, and though she was determined to try. "It should be hair-raising," added Howl. "And you'll exploit me," said Sophie. "And then you'll cut up all my suits to teach me," said Howl. If Sophie or Hal had any attention to spare, they might have noticed that Prince Justin, Wizard Solomon, and Mrs. Fairfax were all trying to speak to Hal, and that Fanny, Martha, and Letty were all plucking at Sophie's sleeves, while Michael was dragging at Hal's jacket. "That was the neatest use of words of power I have ever seen from anyone," Mrs. Fairfax said. "I wouldn't have known what to do with that creature, as I often say." "Sophie," said Letty, "I need your advice." "Wizard Howl," said Wizard Solomon, "I must apologize for trying to bite you so often. In the normal way, I wouldn't dream of setting teeth into a fellow countryman." "Sophie, I think this gentleman is a prince," said Fanny. "Sir," said Prince Justin, "I believe I must thank you for rescuing me from the witch." "Sophie," said Martha, "the spell's off you. Did you hear?" But Sophie and Hal were holding one another's hands and smiling, quite unable to stop. "Don't bother me now," said Hal. "I only did it for the money." "Liar," said Sophie. "I said," Michael shouted, "that Calcifer's come back." That did get Hal's attention, and Sophie's too. They looked at the grate, where sure enough the familiar blue face was flickering among the logs. "You didn't need to do that," said Hal. "I don't mind, as long as I can come and go," said Calcifer. "Besides, it's raining out there in Market Chipping." And that is the end of Howl's Moving Castle. You guys, that was such a wonderful story. Oh, what a lovely ending. Of course, there are 2 more books in this series as well. I think they are related to each other. I have not read them yet, so look forward to that. It'll be an adventure for all of us, and myself included. I haven't read the other 2 books, but I know that'll be just as fun. Oh my goodness, I love this story so very much. It was so good, and I really hope that you enjoyed it as well. This is the first book in the Howl's Castle series, and I'm looking forward to reading the next ones. It'll be a lot of fun. Oh, and we did it in record time too. Oh my, I don't know. I feel overwhelmed at the bittersweet ending. Well, not bittersweet. It was quite a sweet ending. I just feel bittersweet that it's over. Like with every book, I always feel a little bittersweet when we finish it. But because this is a book in a series, we can always come back and read it again. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Oh, I loved it. I know it's very different from the animated movie. But it was still just as lovely. I don't know, I feel so soft. I feel so full. A bittersweet, but I feel so full that we were able to finish it today. So next week, I haven't decided what story to read just yet. I was thinking we could read a little something. I'm not sure. I actually haven't read the sequels, so I'm not entirely sure if they do follow the same story or not. I remember reading the synopsises, and I wasn't sure. They seem to be like interconnected stories, as from what I understand. Like all 3 books are interconnected. So I will have to double check. I'll double check, and I'll let you know from there. But I'm actually really happy we were able to finish this today. I'm not sure about what story to read next week. Let me see. Cause I'm looking at my books now. I'm looking at my books now. I'm reading it through my e-reader, so it's a little messy. It's a little messy for me to work with it. Let's see. Here we go. Oh gosh, it's like I keep trying. Okay, hold on. I'm still trying to figure out how my e-reader works. There we go. Because we have House Moving Castle, Castle in the Air, and House of Many Ways. Let me see. Let me see. Yeah, the next book, Castle in the Air, is definitely different has a different protagonist than the original first story. But I do think it's interconnected. But we'll you know what, we'll get to it next time. We'll definitely get to it next time. I do believe I have another book picked out for next week. Let's see. I'm looking through my library right now. I kind of want to read all tomorrow's. Just gotta find somewhere that says it quickly. I have. I hope you find the books that you're looking for. For me, I have a mixture of like digital books and regular books. So I'm gonna look through my collection and see what we're gonna read. I do have a few different ones that I would love to be able to read. Let's see. Let me see. Just looking through my book list now. I was thinking of reading a classic, but I think I might end up reading something a little bit stranger. I know. The next book we're gonna read. I had to re-download it. Give me one moment, please. Alright. Here it is. The next book we're going to be reading next week will be The Boy with the Cuckoo Clock Heart by Matthias Malziel. I try my best to pronunciate. Malziel. Yes. Matthias Malziel. The Boy with the Cuckoo Clock Heart. This was also made into a movie. A kind of a musical. Also very different from the book. But I also want to be able to read it to you too. So next week we'll be reading The Boy with the Cuckoo Clock Heart. I look forward to it, actually. It'll be a lot of fun. It's another really good story that has a movie. I quite like the movie, but I think I prefer the book a little bit more. But yeah. So I want to thank everyone who came for stopping by. Thank you all for stopping by. I genuinely hope that you enjoyed listening to me read the story. And I can't wait to start the next one for you guys. I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place, a little frazzled. I don't know. whenever I finish a good story, I always feel a little, I don't know how to call it, pensive? A little soft, a little bittersweet. Uh, but I'm always excited to start a new story with you guys. Should be a good listen. I look forward to it. It's gonna be a good story. It is a good story. It is quite a good story. But I'm looking forward to it. but I guess it's time for me to go. I'm going to take a nap because I slept quite badly last night. And I think I'm going to have to take a nice little recovery nap. Plus it's raining and the rain always makes me super sleepy. But anyway, I will see you guys on Thursday. Thursday we are going to be continuing playing The Crooked Man. I think we might be able to finish it tomorrow depending on how I feel. It's not a very long game, but it is one in a 4-part series. So I'm looking forward to playing that for you guys. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna head out, and I hope everyone has a wonderful, fantastic Tuesday and a lovely, wonderful Wednesday. And I'll see you guys on Thursday for more gameplay of The Crooked Man. And remember, hug your friends, tell somebody you love them, and be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world could use a little more goodness. I love you all so very, very much. Take care, guys. Bye. Exact.